Welcome to Conscious Insights, Strategies for Leadership Evolution. Engage in roundtable discussions that spark deep dialogue with executives and thought leaders to advance conscious leadership and explore innovative practices. Join us and gain insights that will elevate your leadership journey. Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Conscious Insights. Today, I have two Scots. I have two Scots that are going to be really fun to talk to. We're talking about a company that they are founders of. We're calling our episode "Built for Mars, Driven by Purpose: The Starsys Founders on Culture, Exit, and Impact." And so we'll talk a little bit to Scott Tibbetts and Scott Christiansen, just some of the journey of behind the scenes of building Starsys. It's a company that powered missions to Mars and other areas. And I want to talk to you. I'll briefly read Scott and Scott's bios, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how this particular interview came to be, and then we'll jump right in. And so first, Scott Tibbetts. Scott, you were the founder and CEO of Starsys Research Corporation, and you started a space company from scratch, from an invention made with $7 in hardware store parts. And it grew to become the world's leading supplier of motors for spacecraft with 150 employees and $20 million in revenues. And you went on to found other companies as well, which we'll talk about. But the Starsys company culture became legend in the international space business for its honoring of employees and extraordinary results. An employee retention rate of 99% and an unprecedented track record of 3,000 mechanisms flown on 300 spacecraft with 100% success. So Starsys has enabled the exploration of every planet in the solar system, including hardware on the surface, Mars, etched with the names of the employees and their families that made it happen. And then Scott Christiansen, you grew up in New Mexico in the small town of Socorro, which I forgot to mention to you that I've been to Socorro. And
not too many people have been there.
Yeah, I've been there on right outside there on a climbing trip. So, but you studied mechanical engineering and played basketball. And it says in 1982, you graduated with your BS in mechanical engineering and found your way to Colorado to work at Rocky Flats, which was a famous nuclear plant, if I have my memory correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And so it was here that you met Scott Tibbetts. You became friends. And then in 1989, you left to join this new small company that he started with a $7 part in his garage.
Yep.
And there was only four of us. And so from 1989 until the present, you've seen the company grow and been acquired several times and have been a part of that. So welcome, Scott and Scott. I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Thank you, Renelle. Good to be here.
Happy to be here.
So it's probably important to mention before I start asking you questions, how this even conspired, because it was kind of fun. So I was at an event with Bridge Entrepreneur Network in Denver, Colorado. It was I think it was a social event, and I'm an advisor, and so is Scott Tibbetts. However, we didn't meet for most of the night, and then at the end, I was getting a little bit hungry and went over to the food, and Scott was the only one sitting next to the food, and we started a conversation, and he said, "I think we might have something in common," and that's when he revealed to me the book, or not the book, the company, and how important culture was to you. And then you gave me the gift of your book, From the Garage to Mars, where I have read most of this book already and understood why you thought we might be friends and have a lot in common. So I am really excited to have you both here. And why don't we just start with you each telling your version of starting Starsys and what was the impetus for that, and then we'll get a little bit more into the culture.
I guess we'll do it chronologically. And I've got a little show and tell thing here. I should have pulled it out a little earlier. Right here. I was with Scott at the nuclear plant, Rocky Flats. I left first about a year earlier and was working with a friend in a very small, an industrial strip area, little office with a garage, and we were making water heaters, home water heaters. It was Daryl Moss and myself, and a core part of that was needing a little device that would, when it got hot, open a valve. And Daryl came up with this idea of using copper tube, and this is it, and copper tube filled with wax. And this
So for those of you on YouTube, he's holding up a copper tube. For those of you on the podcast, it looks like just a very small tube.
Yeah, it's like, well, it actually is just copper pipe that you'd have underneath your sink. We got it from McGuckin's Hardware, and fill it with wax, and it has a little seal and a little rod coming out of the end. And when it gets hot, the wax melts, and it has about 3,000 pounds of pressure. And this rod comes out about 2 inches with about 40 pounds of force. So it makes this great magic trick. You can put this in a cup and pour hot water on it, and slowly the rod comes up 2 inches, and you can lift a small child with it. And it was so cool that, Scott, you're chuckling. This is serious. This is science. And you're making...
It is.
And it really is cool. It's like a magic trick. And
picturing children in the lab.
Lifting them up and down.
Yeah, testing. Yeah.
So we have this tube that you guys were playing with worter heaters, and somehow we ended up with a company that did things for Mars. So how did that translate?
We went to NASA with this thing. I went there and said, "Could you use this on spacecraft?" And they said, "Yeah, we can. We're going to Saturn, and we're trying to replace these explosives that opened the covers. And this is a very gentle way to open covers. And if you could put heaters on this and make it in with space materials, you can save us $50,000 from having to make a telescope handle a blast of an explosive." And that was enough of a impetus to start a company. And right after we got going, I needed a real design engineer to help me make these things. And I think it was less than a year, Scott, that I said, "Hey, I need somebody that is a real engineer to do this." And then you joined.
It was about a year. And,
yeah. Scott, why did you join?
I was just going to make a point. I'm not sure exactly why I joined, but I was ready to do something new. Scott and I got along great, and it looked like there was a lot of potential. I love space, so hey, let's go. So I told him I was leaving, and I think about the end of I think it was 1989. I joined them in the little shop in Boulder, and we started trying to figure out how to make these for space, make them work right.
And were you thinking about culture from the very beginning, right? When there were just four of you, or you like where did that come into play for you?
I think we both were at some level. I think I know for me early on, as we talked about earlier, the book In Search of Excellence had come out, and the importance of values in a company had come out.
In Search of Excellence by Tom Peters.
Tom Peters.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I had also done some courses that were popular back then on human potential that were about how you could use processes or games to make change in how people work together. And I was interested in taking these personal growth concepts and bringing them into a work environment. Okay. So early on, Scott and I started creating some fundamental tenets of how we would work together and how we'd have a flat hierarchy, and how we would, we wouldn't have a hierarchy. We'd have people that were mentors instead of managers. We had this concept of mentors and mentees instead of managers and employees. So we started pretty early with these pretty radical concepts. It was really
at the time they were pretty well. I mean, we still have hierarchy, so we could probably say 30 years later they might still be. I won't say controversial, but we still haven't fully adopted it. But you started pretty early on. And so it was about having a company making something for space. How did you guys get into space? Was that something that you did at Rocky Flats? Like how did that come together?
Well, at the very front end, it happened just because as we were taking this little paraffin actuator around, we went to a lot of different industries, and space was the first one that said, "Hey, we've got a use for it." I mean, we might
Ooh,
have been in medical, we might have been in solar. It's just that space was the first people that said we can use it. So we said, I guess we're going to be a space company, and
that's
that's where it started from.
That's
Really,
so interesting. So we have an interesting contraption. We're very interested in human potential, and we want to see if we could start a company um, that makes something for space, and we can also work with new concepts of working together.
yeah,
That sounds like a lot of
Hmm.
fun.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was the breakthrough that kind of that jumped you from 4 employees to slightly more, and then just talk about how you started to build that culture and continue to conduct those experiments on human potential and how that worked.
Scott, what do you remember when the curve all of a sudden started um, taking off?
I'm trying to recall that. We we got that first delivery set out, and I think we moved over to a slightly larger building and got the design worked out and started getting some more customers. There was a lot of interest in the fact that we could replace pyro devices with something that's very gentle and not nearly as damaging to spacecraft parts. And we got a few more people, and it just, I think the the environment that we created, um, in as we were working, which was very different um, than anywhere else, at least I'd ever seen. But we valued fun. We worked hard. We played hard. Um, there are a lot of stories there, and welcomed really just a lot of different personalities, but again, without being rigid in how we looked at things or thought things should work. In the workforce, everybody found a place, could express themselves. We did great hard work. We worked a lot of hours, uh, and it seems like that might not be attractive, but people loved it, and um, we also had some
So did
creative um, re- recruiting devices. I don't know the exact wording, but we attracted a few people by touting we want somebody wild and crazy. You may recall the exact words better, Scott, but
Yeah,
but
we put an
we
ad in. Oh,
very
go ahead.
unusual. Go.
We put an ad that was, we didn't want regular space people from like Ball Aerospace. We wanted people that weren't stuck in old ways of doing things. So one of our ads was, are you a burger flipper? Are you tired of flipping burgers, good with your hands, and have always wanted to make spacecraft hardware? Come to come to Starsys. And we'd get this very narrow set of people that would say, how did you know? That's me.
Hmm.
And we hired quite a few. If they walked in the door with that, you wrote that for me. We in general hired them.
Yeah.
And some of those people went on to, you know, become very, skilled in the aerospace industry.
I want to know what was it about the typical aerospace industry that you wanted to stay away from, and I don't mean that you wanted to create something different,
Mhm.
and why is that? Did you know, or was it an experiment, or was it a hunch? Like what was going on in your design minds or intuition or in your
Mm.
hearts at that
Right.
time?
I, I know one of the things, Scott, was uh, personal accountability for it has to work. Uh, Typical space companies have all these check boxes, and quality are the ones that make sure it works.
Hmm.
And we put a very strong emphasis that if everybody we'd hire, we'd sit down with and say, if you don't do your job, an astronaut can die, or $1 billion spacecraft's lost. So whatever it takes, no matter what it is, it absolutely has to work in space. We don't care if the system says this or that. It's up to you to be personally responsible for that.
Which is different than like a checklist that you might have had checklists, but there was an element of we trust you as a human and
Yes.
also the process. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that felt different to you.
Yeah. How would you describe that, Scott?
A couple is just on the last. You create trustworthiness by trusting rather than by
Yeah.
strict rules and ways of operating. So and in that aspect of it for me, coming from a government facility, Rocky Flats, it was governed by rules and ways of doing things rather than values and um, maybe more freedom to goof up, but again creating responsibility by that and making it people crave to be responsible because they didn't want to create a bad
Yeah.
result rather than the rules said so.
Yeah.
Did that
So
make
it's
sense?
fundamentally, about trust. I trust you as a human. I trust that you want to do good work. I trust, and so you brought out the human heart, that
Yeah.
element, as part of, as part of quality, right?
Yes.
And
Hmm.
so my sense is it felt good for people too. And so they were
I
willing
think
to do
so.
the work. It
Yep.
wasn't just, oh, I'm going to get in trouble. It's like I'm responsible for something, and
Yeah.
I'm being asked to self lead is what it sounds like. Yeah.
One of the more significant manifestations of that, and it goes back to Tom Peters, was the way we codified our values.
Hmm.
And now you go into companies and say, here's the values. We do this, this, this. And we took a very different approach. We wanted the company to absolutely own them, to be branded on them, to be deep in the DNA. And what we came up with, what Scott and I and the other leaders said is, here's the 6 or 7 values that we have here. We have excellence, we have integrity, but we also put in there fun. That's just as important as those, and family, and a couple of
Hmm.
others, balance, balanced lives. But we didn't define them. And then we had the company define them. And so we had, how many people did we have at that time?
I
60,
think
70?
around 70, 75.
70 people.
Yeah.
We had teams define each of those values in detail, all the things they were, all the things they weren't, very long descriptions. And then the whole company had to vote on every word of every value until it was unanimous throughout the company for every value. And it was brutal.
Oh man.
It was like probably the Continental Congress trying to agree to the Constitution.
Yeah.
And people say, no, that needs to be an or, not an and. And so we change it, we vote. It was hours. But
And you did this because you wanted people to live these values. You want them to be activated, part of the DNA of the organization,
Hmm.
or did you do it just to make something hard? Doesn't sound like that.
no,
No.
very much.
No. The first part.
It was hard, but very
It was
much
hard.
so that everybody realized these were theirs because they voted on every word. And at the end of it, everybody raised their hand saying, I absolutely own and created those values. Everybody in the room. And then everybody signed the back of that sign.
Yeah.
And then everybody got a little card that they put in their wallet. And people today, probably 25 years later, still carry that card in
Mhm.
their wallet, even though it's 15 years, 20 years after the company,
That's wonderful.
just because that meant so much to them that they owned it. It's like the Constitution.
Yeah, it was embodied. Well, what's interesting about that is I do facilitate quite a bit of values and mission work
Yeah.
in different organizations, and
Mhm.
I will tell you that it can still be rare to fully activate values. What's most everyone has values like that. That was something that a lot of companies maybe not everyone had, but at some point and at some organizations, it's still there's just this thing on the wall. They're nice, but they're this thing on the wall. But to actually get people to embody those and to own those, and that is not easy work.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense to me that these years later, um, people would still be feeling that. But then what did that do for performance and for growth and I mean, yes, that's a incredible thing to have. How did it tie back to the company performance?
What do you think, Scott? What are the things that where you can see that
Well,
this did that?
in my mind, it was consistent with what I mentioned earlier. Is creating results through people wanting to do it, wanting to excel, wanting um, to do the work, to do the effort it took, even if it was more than an 8-hour day. Um, and but it wasn't a burden. It was something that they were part of. They felt part of. I think everybody felt part of the company. Um,
Mhm.
and it created also, I think, inter interpersonal bonds between everyone in the room doing the work. They're saying what they honestly felt about uh, pretty important values and things in their lives, and
Yeah.
we were all sharing it, so it got people closer. Again, Scott mentioned that there are still a lot of folks who carry their cards, and there are still um, there's still a large group of people who are still working together in the mechanical uh,
Oh,
mechanisms
yeah.
area,
Yeah.
um, from that original group. Um,
So
so
what I'm
it
hearing you say is it really bonded people together,
Yeah.
which then
Yeah.
just really contributed to productivity and performance
Yeah.
of the organization. People liked living that. They liked doing that together.
You mentioned two of the metrics I realized for now at the very beginning that speak to it. One was 99% retention. Nobody wanted to leave.
Mm,
Mhm.
And that's the family value and the fun value.
yeah.
And there was an interesting piece of it. This was Charlie Hodges' wife, Scott. She came up to me at the Christmas party and said, "We never want Charlie to leave this company because the way he is honored and the way it makes our family work,
Mhm.
this has changed our lives." We managed for the family so that the family didn't want to leave. So
I love
that's,
that. You said you worked really hard and for the family, which sometimes can be a polarity, right? Of wait, you
yeah,
can't work hard and work for the family, and you managed to do both.
and boy, if there was one tenet that could really be an important thing for a company, manage for the family, acknowledge
Mm.
the family, reward for the family rather than, I'm sorry, you got to work 80 hours a week. Sucks to, be a dad. I guess you won't be able to go to show and tell. Um,
Yeah, to really
manage for the
manage.
family is a pretty powerful tenet.
Yeah,
So that
absolutely.
Yeah.
was the family value manifested in retention. The excellence value manifested in no failures. So do those balance nicely.
Mhm.
I mean, it's interesting. There's something else I want to bring up, but it's interesting because they seem actually paradoxical, right?
Yeah.
Of can we
Yes.
do both? But because
Ah, yeah.
you could do both. You found the highest ideals of both of these very important things that actually seem kind of opposite.
Yeah.
I love polarity work, so I'll hear a polarity, and we could talk about that the rest of the time. But you managed to really make something that who I have to pick either or usually. You're like, no, we're going to
Yeah.
do both.
Or
We're gonna do
both.
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 Yeah. There's something else in your book that I don't think, Scott, you and I have never talked about, so this will be my first time mentioning it, is you had this thing called the Gripe Box. But I'll tell you what really got me about the Gripe Box is that you mentioned Aikido. And I do work with an
Yeah.
Aikido master who has taught me a lot about embodied presence and conscious leadership. And
Right.
part of the tenet is when an attacker comes at you, you step off the line and you blend, because Aikido is about not doing non-harm. Yet
Mhm.
these Aikido masters could technically kill you,
Yeah.
but that's not why they are doing it to blend. And so you treated the Gripe Box as blending, as someone's going to come at us with an attack and we're going to blend.
Yeah.
And that's a really different way to
Ooh.
take employee feedback. And so I would
Yeah.
love for you to talk a little bit more about the Gripe Box with the notion of what Aikido meant to you.
Scott, do you remember the complaint about the smokers? That they're angry about the smokers getting extra time off?
I do recall that. I don't think I could tell the story as well as you, but um,
Sometimes the gripes, we encourage the gripes to be angry.
mhm.
And if you see that in the book, you see a picture of the Gripe Box. I remember we delegated having the Gripe Box made, and somebody came back with a Gripe Box with little flowers on it, and it was like, no, it's a Gripe Box. And so they came back with wood burned gripe written on it. It's like, that's what we're talking
There we
about.
go.
And we wanted to be angry, and one of them came in pretty hot, saying, "Listen, the smokers go outside to smoke; they get an extra 15-minute break. That's not fair to us. And it's just not fair." And we did do that. We stepped out of the line and we first touched on that and said, well, we all take responsibility for the amount of work. And so the expectation is if you do take that time off, you work late. Now, that's not going to assuage the anger because it's just sort of pablum. But then what we did is we said, but we want everybody to be healthy. So we're going to implement something immediately here. And we did just this spontaneously when we read the gripe. Anybody who wants to sign up for not smoking for 6 months, we'll give them $500. And we just did that spontaneously in the moment. Went up to the wall, went up to the blackboard, put a thing, spent $500 challenge. And then we said, who wants to come up? So one by one, people in that moment went up and wrote their name.
Mhm.
And we kept track of that. And we actually, I think 4 people, we gave them $500 checks.
I know.
Nice.
Yep, there were
But
several.
what we did in that moment is pivot the energy into, wow, this is a family. The energy completely shifted from, God damn it, I'm wasting I'm working too hard, to I work with a bunch of people that really care. And it completely dissipated that entry in many levels. And there's 4 people that might not be smoking now as a
Yeah.
result of that anger that just pivoted into something that was just a reminder that we're all family.
Yeah. So I just love that notion of how can we step off the line, which is an
Yeah.
Aikido of when an attack comes at us. We welcome the attack, and then how can we, um, you know, what my mentor Chris, says, step off the line and blend.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like that you were treating it that way, and I just think that's a whole different energy of asking for feedback, and it takes some of the rational mind out
Yeah.
and really adds the body to
Mhm.
it. But the other thing I want to talk about is I've read through your book, and you were developing this culture, and things were going really well, and you were growing, and you got to what did we say earlier? 20 million in revenues, 150
Yeah.
employees. How did
Mhm.
how did all this culture work help you when things got hard, or did it ever get hard? I know it got hard because I've read the book. So tell me a little about the transition of the culture, how that supported when things got hard, and what happened from there.
So Scott, I have my version of that because things got very hard. I'd actually, Scott, I'd be interested in sort of your take on that. I've got in my bubble sense of that.
And did they get hard because you were growing too fast? Did they get hard? Like, why did they get hard?
when the wheels came off the cart?
There's the got hard part, and then there's we were trying to fix it, and the wheels fell off. Um, so we were growing super fast, taking on bigger projects, um, and it just everything was getting intense, and we had a large program that we ended up in a. I won't tell that part of the story, but we ended up in a contract that basically didn't serve the work that we needed to do, and we got very upside down on a very large program. So there was a lot of stress in the company, um, and it was the first time we had hit a bump quite this large, and then we ended up eventually working our way through it and finding a company that we were actually, I think, people wise we were larger than they had, but again they had a lot of cash, and we joined with them. And in the meantime, there were some in our efforts to get through that. I ended up on the wrong side of some folks, and uh, just sort of half left the company for a little while to just take some pressure off Scott and some of the other maneuvering that was happening. I actually was actually perfect. My father had at that exact time needed quadruple bypass surgery, so I went and spent I think a couple months in Arizona working remotely, actually, while all the craziness was going on.
So basically, things, a contract didn't go great, a lot of stress. I know at some point the company eventually sold, but my big question is, how did culture help you through that? What was the point of doing all of this work on culture? It helped you grow, right? It definitely helped you grow. And then what was it that happened? Um, to lead up to some of the, you know, making decisions to sell the company, and I mean, people are still working together
Yeah.
from many years ago. And how many years in was that also?
Well, speaking into that, from my perspective, it was about 20 years in. We were 150 people. We were what's called a distressed company, which the program Scott's talking about, we were losing millions of dollars on.
Hmm.
The bank had called our loan, which means we needed to come up with $6 million in 6 months, or they were going to close the doors. There was somebody that had come into the company that saw this as an opportunity to take control of the company, um, and was somebody that the company was not did not want to be in that position. It was almost to some degree a hostile takeover. And in a normal situation like that, you would expect to see a lot of people running for the doors, saying, I'm not going to stick around for this. And if you would have had that, you would have had a catalytic situation where it would have collapsed, where
Hmm.
people would have left, the company would have collapsed in on itself, the bank would have foreclosed. We would have all been, certainly Scott and I would have been out of work. It would have been a crashing into the company, into the ground. And even though there was a real disappointment in watching Scott and I, and primarily me, I'm the one that lost control of the company, lose control of the company and almost be handing it over to this fellow. They hung in there. I don't think anybody left Scott through that period.
No,
It was like
and
the ship was sinking, and they just said, I'm in this until I can't be in it anymore
mhm.
to try to keep us afloat.
Yeah. So that's where relationships and trust and culture comes in. They were really, really hard,
Yeah.
and it could have gotten even harder, even quicker. But there was these relationships. So when I talk about complexity a lot,
Okay.
and now I want to come back to where we are in the world today, is when
Right.
we get into complexity. So first of all, building things for space is complex. It's not easy. And then
Yes.
and then having a culture, and then having things get really distressed. So that's complexity. And much of the working complexity of what holds things together, because it's a lot of unknowns. And it's a lot of really difficult
Yeah.
unknown processes, kind of right by chaos, but not quite. Sometimes chaos, but not always
Yeah.
chaos. It's relationships and trust that really help us through. And so what you did in this company, and I know you eventually sold it, but people stayed with it, and Scott Christensen being one of those who kept working on it. I mean, we could probably do 3 podcasts on this, but there's this level of complexity. And you did something that was a little different, 20 years ago. The world is much more complex even now. And so I would love for you to help make the bridge of, in the complexity we're seeing today, what did you do that then was really different that we really must take forward as we walk more and more into the unknown in this? And so you were building things for Mars.
Mm.
Now we've got
Yeah.
AI, we're talking polarity. Either we've got people on really different belief systems. What is what you did then? How would it take us through and translate to today?
That's a good question.
Wow.
I ask good questions.
You go first, Scott.
No, I was waiting to hear what you had in mind, Scott. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great question, Renelle. It really is. I've got some thoughts, but give it a go.
Well, my first thought, and this may sound a little trite, but when we talk about the complexity of spacecraft mechanisms, or maybe even the complexities
Mhm.
of society, is complex is just a lot of simple things just all bundled up together. So, um, I would I would I would believe that a lot of the things that we did way back, starting in Starsys, would go again. They were not horribly complex things. We kept things simple and kind of and personal um and open, not judgmental. So there were a lot of ingredients that I think even today could be applied. Um,
Yeah.
Again, there are other maybe the barriers are higher now a little bit, but I don't think the solutions necessarily are that much different. It's really getting down and having and they were disparate people when we were there's just a values exercise. That's 50 people and getting them all to look at some values of a company, ways we're going to behave together um, as we work together. There were a lot of picking about this and what about that, but the exercise breaks down. I think the exercise itself broke down a lot of barriers between people so that they could work together and care about each other and
Oh,
and
interesting.
fight
Interesting.
together when
Yeah.
things got tough. If that makes sense.
So truly knowing each other
Yeah.
is,
Uh-huh.
yeah, it sounds something simple. It's not always so simple to do because you've got to really make the space for it.
Right.
And you're saying that applies
Yeah.
just as much as it did when you first started in the complexity we find ourselves in today. Yeah.
Buil- Building on what Scott's saying, you can argue that because we are in such um, uh, a complex technological arena, in some ways we were testing out the idea of using these values in a world that was getting complex because we were already in something that was very complex.
Mm-hmm.
So you could kind of say, hey, we're testing something out. Let's see how this stuff works in what the world's going to become.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what is interesting is when and this, you'll love this from the polar kind of piece, is that we didn't do the SpaceX work 80 hours a week thing. We were working 40, 50 hours a week. We had balanced lives. It was a key value. And we actually had every other Friday off. Everybody got a 3-day weekend every other week. But we were extraordinarily productive. We were far more productive than other space companies. And as a result, we were very profitable. So you don't have to work yourself to the bone in order to be highly productive. And counterintuitively, when you brought fun and caring and spent time doing these things, I mean, we'd sit down over lunch and watch Warner Brothers cartoons and make a big deal of it. But it wasn't that we were relaxed. It was that broke down the boundaries so people worked together in an extraordinarily efficient way. And I mean, that's what. Well, and the other piece, oh my God, and we could get lost in this one. We didn't have division. We didn't have this group fighting against that group.
You didn't have the silos.
Right.
We didn't have silos, and we didn't have this division of people screaming at each other, which is just making us it's bringing us to our knees now in the world. We had everybody with, understanding of everybody else within the company. You didn't have silos. And I don't know how you just take that cookie cutter of what we did and apply it to what's going on now, but it's.
Well, let me ask you this. Yeah, let me ask you this question. If I was a leader listening to this right now, let's say there's two different types. There are many different types of leaders that could be listening, but there's one type of leader that could be at the beginning stages or early stages of running a company. There's another leader that could be within an organization that knows something needs to change because there are silos so what advice, and maybe it's different advice to the different kinds of leaders, but what advice from what you learned for building an extraordinary culture in a space company, and then selling it and still having people 30 years later working together, what advice would you give people today that you learned from that? And it could be things not to do too, but it could also be things to do or to be.
There is one thing that was really a hack, cheat code, whatever you want to call it. It was very powerful, which was we created these games, processes, exercises, and that were very powerful in taking the company and moving it very strongly in certain areas. The Gripe Box was one of them. So, for instance, if you want to create connection between the company, at the risk. So if I was working with a leader that had a company that was 100 people and had an aha that we need to get rid of hierarchy, or we need to create more connection, or we need to create an acceptance of mistakes. And I'm going to let Scott speak to one that he loves, and I do too. It's probably one of our favorite. It's called efforts and blunders. So let's say you have a company that's not, they're hiding mistakes. They're too worried they're not vulnerable enough, and they're making mistakes but hiding them. And you need them to be open to learn from mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's a huge issue. How do you just tell people to do that? This is one of the games we play. It's called Efforts and Blunders. I'll let Scott explain it. And this would be one of the things I would suggest to leaders, that these games we developed, use these.
Okay.
Right. So there's so many layers to this, but once a month we would have a discussion, and I think we got. How did we nominate folks for either of those? Was it self-nomination?
Efforts were nominated by the company. Who did the most heroic effort? Blunders had to be self-nominated.
Self-nominated. That's right. So once
so you
a month.
had to be brave.
Yes. But there was a reward for both, actually. So the best effort, I think we put up, and everybody in the room voted, and the winner was the the best, right? So they got a prize, weekend at a spa at a ski area or something for a couple nights, or a balloon ride, something kind of fun. Not you're not going to get rich off it, but something that really acknowledged that. And then the blunders, if there were more than one blunder that was self-nominated, if 2 or 3 people wanted to throw their blunder out, then the company would vote on those, and they would also get a similar award for explaining their blunder. And part of that was explaining the blunder, why it happened, and what we needed to do to fix that or make sure it didn't happen again. So there was you got a reward for both, and again it created more openness, and again, the worst thing you can do, especially in a spacecraft, is have a hidden error or a hidden fault. So that was how we got people. We celebrated the sharing of blunders, and how do you fix it? And we celebrated the best efforts, who did the coolest thing that month.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing, and and we have to wrap up soon, but there's definitely
Hmm.
From the Garage to Mars that I will put in our show notes, that talks about the company's journey. But there's something that you're saying is when mistakes are made a lot in organizations, a new process is put into place. And there's just becomes a lot of fear and control
Hmm.
around mistakes, and then we want people to innovate, but we have so many processes around mistakes that it just brings this fear in. And so what I am hearing you say of something that, as things get more complex, instead of leaders, um, you know, getting more fearful and more full of control, it's actually about, we need to open up more, and we need to build
Yep.
these relationships, and we actually do need to
Yes.
fail, but we need to fail in a way that we fail in a way that we also understand how to correct that. And so what seems, this was cutting edge culture work, it still is kind of cutting edge culture work, and it's actually pretty simple. Now,
Yeah.
humans aren't that simple. Humans are never going to be simple, but really focusing on the humans and getting us out of our fear and control and into what I want to call love and trust,
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
can
Love and
really
trust.
take us through the
Huh.
complexity that we're seeing today. And so I think that's a big thing that I heard, that, hey, yep, there's this space company that came online to conduct some experiments in 1989, but there was something that lasted, and it's really important today. And Scott, I think that's when you and I met. We were having a conversation, just about some of these things that might have not been the specific thing, but there was a resonance.
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
and oh wow, companies are about more than the bottom line. The bottom line's important, but we can do so much more as we grow business. And so I want to thank you both so much for being
Oh,
on today, because I really wanted to talk more about what you did with, like, you did this in a different way than most people did then, but also are doing now. And so I think there's a lot we can learn from you. And again, I will put how to get in contact with you and to get the book on the show notes. And congratulations to both of you for having an incredible company, and really being part of changing the world, literally the
mm.
cosmos.
Well,
So
thank you for letting us tell the story. We never tire. Neither of us ever tire of that.
Oh no,
And so
awesome.
thanks for letting us
there
do
was
that.
there's a lot of fun, and we did some good things.
We
It's been
did
a
good
good journey.
things.
I love your
Yep.
stories, and I wish I could have worked for you. All right. Thank you so
Thank you very much.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Renelle.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
For more information, visit insight-cc.com or email us at info@insight-cc.com. We look forward to hearing from you.